Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. We are going to go ahead and just mute everybody. Um, Hello and welcome to Preparing for an Administrative Review. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Just be respectful of everybody's time since it is 1 o'clock. And this webinar will be recorded, so you will receive a link to it after the recording is finished, so that you can review it and share it. And I'll be providing additional information as well afterwards. So today is Wednesday, September 6th, 2023. This webinar is intended for school food authorities scheduled to receive an administrative review in the 2023-2024. I can't believe we're saying that already in this school year. So you are here because you were notified within the last 2 weeks that you're going to receive an administrative review, and our company, CN Resource, will be conducting the review on behalf of the Louisiana Department of Education. My name is Jacqueline Peskowski, and I, along with Catherine Rippey, will be your host for today. We'll be recording this webinar, as I mentioned. You'll receive a link once the recording is finished. We will be entering or asking some questions or leaving room for you to ask questions, but just please try to use the chat feature so that we can have a record of them. And what we'll end up doing is compiling a question and answer document that will be sent to everybody so that everyone can have a record of the questions that were asked as well as the answers. All right. Bear with me. I've got a lot of screens open here. There we go. So today's agenda, today you'll get an introduction to CN Resource and meet some of the team members that specialize in the National School Lunch Program and School Breakfast Program. We'll talk about what the administrative review is from the perspective of USDA's prescribed process, and then what that looks like for you as you are getting your review completed with CNR. Then we'll discuss each area of the review, what documents our team will need to see to confirm that you are operating a program that complies with regulatory requirements, and the ways that you can start preparing now. And then finally, we'll discuss the lines of communication that have been set up for you. We want this process to feel like a helping learning experience, not an audit. And we think we've established a process that hopefully ensures that you're not feeling alone or under scrutiny, and that we are alongside you the whole way. Let me just let a couple more people in from the waiting room. There we go. Okay, so who is CN Resource, or who are CN Resource? CN Resource was started about 10 to 15 years ago as a spinoff from one of the largest corporate dietitian firms in the country. Somebody figured out that state agencies needed help or additional help completing the administrative reviews under the child nutrition programs. The work started small and stayed that way for several years, and then almost stopped entirely in the early days of the COVID pandemic. But then we figured out how to adapt, just like everybody else did, with changing USDA requirements. And then it suddenly seemed like the need for help for state agencies took off, and our company more than doubled in size. We are proud to be working with the states you see highlighted in yellow on the screen. There's Louisiana there. And we are constantly looking for ways we can provide more assistance. Our team includes registered dietitians, CPAs, former food service directors, former state agency staff, all people who really care about the work that you do, and many of whom have been in your shoes. Our mission is this: CN Resource exists to promote responsible oversight of federal nutrition programs through system expertise, thoughtful and caring employees, forward-looking customer service, and overall concern for the health and well-being of America's children. We know that what you do is not small work, and we definitely appreciate that as we are working with you to complete this required process. There we go. The three of us on the screen oversee the entire process of the National School Lunch Program reviews for CN Resource. Kendra Burton is our Director of NSLP. Catherine Rippey is our Director of Financial Reviews, and we've established kind of this independent section of our team because USDA has increased the focus applied to reviews of financial management and procurement procedures. So we've established this team of specialists headed by Catherine to not only ensure compliance, but ensure comprehension in these areas as well. I am the Director of Process Management and Improvement. I don't know if I said my name out loud, but I'm Jacqueline Peskowski. You don't have to remember how to say my last name. But my focus is on ensuring that we are conducting the reviews that, yes, follow USDA and state requirements, but also that is most advantageous to you, the program operator. We'd like to make the review painless and burden-free, and that might be slightly impossible, but we can try to make it feel like more of a partnership. You can see the rest of the team noted on the slide. You do not need to know who all of these fantastic people are or what their roles are. They do all have important parts to play in the process, but as I'll touch on later, in an effort to streamline the process, you'll really only need to keep track of one person here at CNR, and that will be your assigned Senior Review Specialist, or SRS. So more on that later. Okay, so what is the administrative review? For many of you, this might not be your first time around with this, but if it is, we'll just cover it here real quick. Directly from USDA, it is the assessment of the School Food Authority's administration, so your administration of the National School Lunch Program, School Breakfast Program, and any of the other school nutrition programs that you might be operating. There are multiple ways that we can break the process down to make it smaller or make it more manageable. And we think we've done it in a way that makes the most sense. But again, that's part of what my role is here. So we're going to see how things go for this year. Things are continuing to evolve after we've come out of COVID. And if we see room for improvement, we're going to make the change. So from the perspective of USDA, we have to look at your operation of the school meal programs comprehensively. You might also hear to this referred to as the critical areas of review. You are receiving reimbursement under the assumption that you are providing reimbursable meals, so meals that meet the meal pattern, to eligible students, students who qualify for free or reduced meals, and that you have a way of counting those meals accurately. So you have a point of service that counts those free and reduced meals as they are served. So overall, we need to make sure that you can do those three things. And this happens through offsite review of documentation and onsite observation of meal service. Then we've broken the review apart into three other pieces. The review of your program operations, how you determine eligibility of your students for those free or reduced meals, how you issue those benefits to them, how you count the meals and submit them in a claim, and then all of the other general program requirements like civil rights, local wellness policy, and professional standards, and so forth. This is primarily done offsite in pieces where you submit documentation to our review team. And that's our goal, is to get most of this done offsite so that we have an entire picture of your program before we set foot on site. We feel like this is the least intrusive for you to be able to break it apart and ask for documentation that shows that you're running a great program. And then that way we can complete most of the review before we even come on site. And then when we're there, we're just confirming that everything is as the documentation says it is. So then we have the review of your financial management practices. And this is where we take a look at financial management of the programs and your procurement practices. We bring in our team of financial specialists. And again, we try to review all of this offsite via documentation review that you submit to our team. We are also coupling this with procurement practices as well. We just determined that there were so many areas of overlap with resource management and procurement that it would be better to have a single team conducting this portion of the review to make it easier for you and for everybody. Last, there is the review of how it all comes together, the meal service. So we have all of these pieces that go on to again, we have the eligibility of the students, we have the reimbursable meal, we have accounting and claiming system, but then where the rubber meets the road is the meal service. So we need to determine compliance with what you are serving and how you are serving it, as well as how you are counting the meals. Again, our goal is to try to review as much of this as possible offsite via documentation review, but then you just can't beat that onsite observation. So a portion of it will be conducted via onsite meal service observation of your meal preparation and service so that we can get the whole picture. Okay, so that was a look at the review from the perspective of USDA's prescribed review process. Here's a look at the timeline for how we at CNR will be completing the review with you this year. As I mentioned, the one person here at CNR that you need to keep track of is the Senior Review Specialist. That person will be your main point of contact. So starting next week, our team will begin the process of contacting you to schedule your on-site review date and assign an SRS to you. That person will be with you through the whole process. You will receive your official review notification letter and resource guide with all applicable documents we will be asking you to submit over the next several weeks, as well as applicable due dates. So that SRS will be your guide, and they will be there with you, knowing exactly how your program is operating, what parts of the review apply to you. They'll be calling you, emailing you, and helping you to stay on track. They're going to be your buddy through the whole thing. This is a process. We've broken it apart and extended it so it does go over several weeks. And again, we feel like this makes it way more manageable for you so that you can continue to do the great jobs that you do. And it starts here with notification. So right there on the left-hand side of your screen. After you've received your official notification and your resource guide with all of the documentation that we're going to be requesting from you, your SRS will schedule a financial call with you. And Catherine will discuss this more in depth. But what it is one of our financial review specialists will be on the line with you and your SRS to complete the preliminary financial questions that are required in the review. And that'll determine the scope of the resource management and financial review going forward. After that financial call, we'll begin several weeks, as I mentioned, of documentation collection. And all of that will be outlined in your personalized resource guide. And you'll be given a specialized list of everything that we need from you and when we need it. Your SRS will be with you the whole time, helping you get everything turned in and making sure that you're staying on track so that we have that whole big picture of what your program looks like before we even set foot there. And then that takes us to the on-site review. This is where it kind of all culminates. This is where the SRS steps aside just slightly, but not really. They're still there. You can still call them when the on-site review is happening, but they will introduce you to your senior observation specialist. And that is the person who will be visiting your program to actually observe meal service and other aspects of the program that can only be observed in action and on-site. So your SRS, your review buddy, will introduce you to your SOS before they actually come out. So they're not going to be a total stranger. You guys will have been introduced. You will know who they are. And again, since we've done most of the review offsite, they will have a great picture of what they should be seeing when they come on site. They're just going to be seeing all the amazing work that you do in action, and that way they can confirm that the paperwork matches what is in practice, as is required by USDA. After the completion of the on-site review, we will finalize a report that is provided to you to summarize everything that we worked on together through the whole process, focusing first on all of the great things that you're already doing, and then the areas that can be improved upon and anything that must be corrected to ensure compliance. If any corrective action is required, you will be told in the report how to respond. Okay. So now that we've discussed what the review process will look like, let's dive deeper into what will be reviewed for each portion of the review and how you can prepare. So for those of you that have been around before, this might look very familiar. We've broken it down according to how USDA has their review modules. We feel like that's a pretty good organization, and it'll match up with some of the forms that you'll be helping us complete. So certification and benefit issuance. This goes back to one of those critical areas. So do you have a way of determining which students are eligible for free and reduced meals? We'll look at your entire process. So everything that you're starting to do now since it's the start of the school year, how you have provided income applications to families, how you've notified them if they're eligible for direct certification, how you're collecting that information from them, and then how you're transferring that free and reduced eligibility over to the point of service. So are we able to connect their eligibility to the point where they receive the meal and it's recorded as a free or reduced meal? This is known as a critical area because any type of issue that would change a student's eligibility could result in fiscal action, and it is one of the bases of the claim that you submit for reimbursement. So we try to take our time and really make sure we understand your process for this. So we do ask for a roster or master list for all of the students under your school food authority. And then we will pick a sample of students that we need to look at eligibility documentation for. Um, you don't have to worry about that. You just have to give us the big list, and then we will make the choice for you of which ones we want to take a look at. So then we will ask for those selected students for their direct certification match results. If they were certified based on a household income application, maybe they were extended eligibility because of a household member, or maybe they're on a list of homeless or migrant or runaway students, or maybe they're a foster child. We will just ask for whatever documentation you have to support their free and reduced status. And then again, following your process, we will want to see what it looks like when those kids get notified. We just want to see a copy of your notification letters that you would send out for somebody who's given free or reduced benefits, or for somebody who's denied benefits, so that we can again see that your process aligns with what USDA requires. So how can you prepare now for this part of the review? What you can do is start checking your officials. So who is responsible for providing or not providing for determining free and reduced status on applications? Who goes over the applications? Do they know what their role is? Are they signing applications? Are they showing their work when necessary? Whoever is responsible, do you have a plan for that? And then maybe just start going through all of your applications if you aren't already in the practice of having somebody double check, making sure that all of your applications that have been approved for free reduced benefits are complete, that you're not missing signatures, that income was converted correctly, that it fully supports a child's free or reduced status. And then along the next step, making sure that a child's free or reduced status was correctly transferred over to your master list or roster or whatever you want to call it, whatever it is that ties to your point of service that would mark that child's meal as free, reduced, or paid. Okay, and then the piece that follows next would be verification. So it's a little bit early in the school year to be working on verification, or maybe you're getting a jump on it and you already are getting going with it. But we will take a look at your verification processes. So how you complete this required process, and then what do you do as a result of verification for those applications that had to change status, or the documentation actually didn't support their benefits. And then we'll want to see that you correctly reported your verification activities to the state. So similar to certification and benefit issuance, the documentation we want to see, we will ask for a sample of applications that were selected for verification. And then we'll want to see what your letters look like. If you use the state templates, that's great. If you use your own, that's great too. But we just want to see the letters that you would have used to notify families that they were selected for the verification process, and then letting them know what the results were. If you receive documentation from families for verification, we want to see what that looked like as well. So if you had pay stubs or any other documents that support their eligibility, we would need to see that. And then once you submit your verification report, we'll take a look at that as well. So how you can prepare, again, you can check your officials. So who is responsible for doing verification? Who is the confirming official? Who is the person that's going through and double checking that an application was confirmed correctly in the first place? Are they signing the back of the application, or where they should be? Is the person who's following up on verification signing off on it? So just making sure that everybody is in place to complete the process, and making sure that they signed off where they needed to. You could start noting error-prone applications right now if that's required for your operation. If you're required to choose from the error-prone sample, you can start setting aside those applications now just to make your process smoother. And then going through your verification file. I mean, this is going to apply later as we get more into the verification process, but just making sure this year as you're doing it, making sure that your documentation supports the process. So does it tell the story of what you did during verification? Do you have the applications that were selected, a copy of the letters that were sent to the households? Do you have the supporting documentation from them? And if we as reviewers are to come in and look at it, does it completely tell the story of what happened to that application? Okay, if anybody operates community eligibility provision or CEP, there's also a portion of the review that we will not, I don't want to say add on, but that will be a part of your review process tied to CEP. And for the most part, when you were approved to start your CEP cycle, the validation work was really taken care of at that point. We will just be ensuring that you are keeping the required documentation to support your identified student percentages and claiming percentages. So we want to make sure that you have all of that documentation still in place, and that you're correctly applying that identified student percentage to your meal counts for your claim, which should all be automated with LDE system with CNP. But we're just going to make sure that you have all of the documentation in place to support it. So really all that you need to do to prepare for this is just make sure you have your CEP cycle data set aside and organized and ready to show our reviewer. For meal counting and claiming, again, this is another one of those big critical areas where, again, if there are issues that could change your claim for reimbursement, that could result in fiscal action, which fiscal action really is just the state taking back some of the reimbursement due to issues that might have been found. But we need to make sure that you have an adequate counting and claiming system in place. So to do that, we'll look at how you're counting those meals. Are you counting them at a designated point of service, which is that snapshot in time where a child receives a meal, and whether it's on paper or done electronically, a meal is logged or counted. And then following along with your process, once you've counted a meal, how do you consolidate all of your daily meal counts into a monthly claim for reimbursement? So making sure that you're submitting that correctly to LDE. Do you have internal controls or edit checks in place to make sure that you're not accidentally counting more meals than you have students? So we want to see that you have a system in place that does that. It might be automated, already done in your meal counting software, or it might be something that you do manually at the end of the month. And then meal charging. We want to know for the students that don't qualify for free and reduced meals, your paid students, do you have a policy in place should they need a meal but not have the money on hand with them to purchase a meal? So we want to know what your policy is, and we will collect that information via collection of documentation, but also by having you answer some review questions. So we'll want to know what those procedures are. We'll ask for an explanation, or if you have them written, we'll ask for those written procedures for counting, and then for your meal charge policy. And then we will also need to validate 1 month's claim for selected sites. So we'll ask for those daily meal counts and those daily edit checks for certain selected sites to make sure that the claim was submitted correctly. And those meal counts might be just your electronic printouts, or they could be daily paper counts. But either or, we just need to make sure that your claim is supported by meal counts. So to prepare, you can ensure that somebody is doing edit checks, that you have those internal controls in place, making sure that if it's your electronic system that's doing it, that you have the correct attendance factor plugged in, or if you're doing it manually, making sure that you're using the correct template and doing the math correctly. You could review your charging policy and just make sure that it's still current for what your schools are doing. And then the best piece of advice I can give is probably just to go and observe your point of service. We'll talk about this in many other slides going forward, but one of the best pieces to prepare is just to go out and conduct a monitoring review. Go on site and take a look at what you're observing. If you are the person that's there every day, maybe try to put on, another hat and pretend that you're a reviewer and, say, what would this look like to somebody who isn't normally a part of this service every day? Am I following all of the program regulations? Is my team following the program regulations? Or if you're not in that kitchen every day, again, it can be easier to see where things might need to be tightened up or improved upon. So going out and looking at that point of service and again, making sure that those meals are being counted correctly. All right, meal pattern compliance. This is the last of those big three critical areas because we talked about student eligibility, so whether or not they are eligible for free and reduced meals, and then if you have a way of correctly counting those meals. But then are you actually serving a reimbursable meal? Does what you're serving meet the federal definition of what a reimbursable meal is? So we need to make sure that you're following the meal pattern requirements. We'll make sure that all of the components are there, that there's offered for each meal served, and then that you're meeting the daily and weekly minimums, depending on the grade groups that you're serving, and what meal service it is. And if you're using offer versus serve, we'll also need to make sure that this is the portion that we'll just have to observe mostly while on site, are students selecting complete reimbursable meals. So the documentation that we'll collect, again, we want to try to have as much of this done ahead of time as we can, are your production records for 1 week. We start off with 1 week, and we will tell you what week that is. But we will ask for those completed production records and then everything to support that a reimbursable meal was served. So any food labels, child nutrition labels, product formulation statements, standardized recipes. We'll make sure that everything from the bottom up supports that week of menus met the meal pattern requirements. And this is a big chunk. This is a lot to have to submit, and we fully recognize that. So to prepare, start looking at your production records now, making sure that your staff know how to complete them. Since this is a critical piece of program documentation and this is what USDA accepts as proof that a reimbursable meal was served, making sure that your staff know how to complete this, that they know how to indicate the portion sizes and the quantity that they've been preparing and what's left over and everything. Start compiling labels. As soon as you know the week that we are going to be asking for, just go through and making sure that you have CN labels or nutrition facts labels for any item that's on file. Generally, we don't need labels for fruits and vegetables. Milk, we just need to know what kind you're serving, but anything that we need to show proof that it contributes toward the components. So your bread, grain items, your meat alternates, or anything that is kind of a combination processed food item, will need to see labels to support that it meets the component requirements for NSLP or SBP. So just start compiling those labels or organizing them, and then making sure that your team is using standardized recipes. Using standardized recipes ensures that we get a consistent result every time, and it's the way that we can make sure that any of the great food that you're making from scratch meets the meal pattern requirements or provides enough of a component. So just going through and making sure that your staff, are using those standardized recipes, and if they're not, maybe creating some, and then making sure that they're following them correctly. All right, so I'll go ahead and let Catherine touch on resource management and procurement.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqueline. So for resource management, as Jacqueline touched on earlier with the review timeline, we start that process of the resource management and procurement with a financial review call. So that call will be between the sponsor and then that senior review specialist and the financial review specialist. And what it is just to discuss those initial questions for resource management, because resource management is a risk-based portion of the review. And so the modules essentially all depend on the responses to those initial questions. And so we like to go through those questions with you to say, here's the question, but here's what it means, and here's how it applies to you locally. So that call is really good to have anybody who has a part in child nutrition finances and procurement to be on, so that everyone is on the same page and can answer those those questions as part of the review. And so then based on that call, there will also be supporting documents that will be needed. And those are listed in the middle under those risk assessment documents. Some of them may already be in the system. So I know that spend down plans are already in the system. So if documents are already in there, we will get them from there. Otherwise, you will have a checklist of these. So don't stress about it right now, but you will have a checklist of these. And we will then validate those answers that we talked about on the phone call, and we will do that risk assessment. And so depending upon those answers, additional questions might be generated based off of your responses. And if additional questions are generated, it doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. So for example, if you say that your district sells a la carte, then automatically you get a few additional questions just related to that section. So of course, you're not doing anything wrong. We just have to take a little bit deeper dive there, answer a couple additional questions, and then get a few additional documents for those comprehensive reviews. And so you may have no comprehensive reviews, or you could have one in each of the 4 areas. It all just depends upon the initial responses to that risk assessment or those 700 series questions from your offsite. So again, in the middle, there are kind of 2 phases of documents. The ones that will validate those initial questions are up at the top. And then those comprehensive review documents, again, you'll see that those vary by section, just depending upon which ones your SFA might need on there. And then as Jacqueline has touched on in the other areas, what can you do now to prepare? So you can, resource management is going to be looking at last year. Since those documents are done, you can go ahead and start gathering those or figuring out what reports need to be run in your system. And you can go ahead and start pulling those and looking at them just so that you have a jump start on it. And sometimes just figuring out which report to pull in the system is one of the hardest things. So if you can start looking for that, and then also read through that risk assessment. So yes, we will absolutely go through it question by question with you on the call, but just so that you have an idea of, what's going to be discussed or what can you go ahead and get to prepare for that call, read through those questions. There will be a resource guide that will come to you, and those questions will be in there. So you can go ahead and get started on that. And then gather your team. So we talked about that financial review call. That call is super important for everybody with a part in that to be involved in. And so you can start looking at locally who is involved in that. So sometimes it's the food service director and a business manager, a bookkeeper. And so figuring out who all will play a role in this portion of the review, getting them on board for that call, having them read through those questions on there. Whoever it may be, whether you are a district or a charter or residential, this section will still apply. And so gathering your team to get ready is very important right now. So then, as Jacqueline mentioned, we are tying together kind of the procurement review. And so, no, they are absolutely not the same thing for procurement. But we will look at that because procurement is essentially how are you purchasing what you are purchasing? And then resource management is those crucial areas to the financial management system. So with procurement, that review kind of works in phases, and we'll talk about this on that initial financial review call as well. And so we'll go through that procurement tool, which is step one of that process. And that procurement tool is super important because it is what guides the whole rest of your procurement review. And so getting that information plugged in accurately up front can save everybody, some hassle in the long run, additional documents later. And so that will be explained on that initial call, but that is step one of the review, is filling out that procurement review tool and then giving us the procurement code of conduct, procurement procedures, and vendor paid list. And this is all for last year as well. So you can see resource management is last year, procurement is last year. And so that's step one. And then what happens is you submit that. And on our end, there is nothing that you need to do on step two. We are not looking at all purchases with all vendors for last year. So it is a random sample based on assessment factors on our end. And so for step two, what the reviewer is doing is looking at everything, validating it, and then selecting the vendors and purchases that we will need to look at in a little bit deeper detail. And so you will get a checklist. It will have the vendors and what is needed for each of those. And so then step three, it kind of goes back to you all of giving us that documentation and then the reviewer going through it and asking you any questions. So it's kind of a back and forth process on that procurement review. And you'll see on the middle section that the documents are just what we just talked about. And so really there's documents for you all to work on in step one and then documents in step three. And the documents again will vary, just like in resource management, depending upon your responses. Procurement is the same way. So depending on the procurement methods used, then if you didn't use one of the methods, then that section won't apply to you. But again, we'll give you a checklist that tells you the vendor and each document that we need. So there's no room for guessing on your end. We'll take that out of it for you. And then what can you do to prepare now? Since the purchases happened last year, you can go ahead and look at last year. And if you don't already have your vendors categorized by procurement method, then you can go ahead and start doing that. And that will put you ahead in this area. So for example, if you got quotes on something, then you can go ahead and categorize that by small. Formal bids, you can go ahead and list that next to that vendor so that you know how that you procured them. And that will take a lot of the work out of completing that procurement tool when that time comes. And then again, gather your team. So resource management and procurement often take a lot of teamwork for all people that are working in the process. And so again, with procurement, it might be a food service director or manager, and then, a purchasing department. So whoever is involved in procuring and purchasing for child nutrition will need to be involved in this process and work together to complete that procurement tool. Jacqueline, I will give it back to you.
All right, thanks, Catherine. Okay. So we've talked about some of the more critical areas of review, and again, those are the areas that really tie directly to your claim for reimbursement. So that's why they're called critical, and that's why we're a little bit more thorough with some of them and ask for a little bit more supporting documentation, again, to make sure that your claim is supported. And then any changes that might have to happen to change your claim because of maybe issues that we found, that's where we have fiscal action, where the state takes back some of the reimbursement that you received. And then we have those financial and procurement pieces. which you can see probably why we've created just a separate team to look at these, a separate team of specialists, is because they're just so unique and different than everything else. The rest of the review sections that we're going to talk about are also known as general areas, and there's no fiscal action tied to them, but there's still all requirements of operating these child nutrition programs. So you still need to follow the guidelines, and again, our team is going to be with you to make sure that you're aware of anything that needs to be improved upon. So the first module that we're going to talk about is civil rights. So making sure that you're in compliance with all of the civil rights requirements, making sure that participants know what their rights are. So first is notifying them, making sure that you've published a public media release to let your community know that you're offering the child nutrition programs, and then making sure that all program materials include the correct non-discrimination statement. And I put an asterisk there next to program materials in the documents column, because you don't need to send us anything in particular for that. We're just going to be looking at all of the program materials that you send to us. So that includes anything that is provided to your families, to your school households, about the program. So your notification letters, any type of menu or brochure, we need to make sure that the appropriate non-discrimination statement is on those materials. Handling requests or complaints. So do you have procedures in place for handling civil rights complaints? And do your staff know how they work? Do they understand that they're not supposed to handle the complaint on their own, that they have to route the complaint up to you and ultimately to the Department of Ed? Do you have procedures in place to handle requests for accommodations because of special dietary needs? Do you have those medical statements on file to support that, signed by an appropriate medical official? And then staff training. Do staff know what their responsibilities are in maintaining compliance with civil rights requirements? Do you have the documentation to show that all of your staff received that training? So to prepare, one of the things that I just tell everybody to go ahead and do right now is check your points of service in your kitchens or your cafeterias, and making sure that the And Justice for All, AJFA, that poster is posted. It's great if it's posted in behind the serving line or in your office, but it needs to be where your program participants can see it. So just making sure that that's there, and then checking all of your material for the correct non-discrimination statement, NDS. Just go through and checking all of that right now. Making sure that you have complaint procedures in place. And if you don't, there's a template that's available through LDOE's resources page, and making sure that that gets implemented, and then making sure that your staff are aware of it. It's the start of the school year, and so it's a great time to make sure that all of your staff have been trained, since they're required to go through it annually. We're required to go through it annually since we play a role in these child nutrition programs. So making sure that your staff receive that required civil rights training, and that you have the documentation or assignment sheet to support that. Monitoring. This might seem like very little content on this page here, but it ties everywhere. Are you maintaining adequate program oversight? Are you monitoring your program? And really, this only applies to sponsors that have more than one site in operation, but I think it's a good practice for everybody, even if you only have one site, to put on your monitor hat and complete the monitoring review form, the on-site monitoring review. For those of you where it's required, you want to make sure also that you're completing it in the correct time frame. These monitoring reviews are required to be done before February 1st every year. So I think it's a great practice in preparation if you just get it done now. So we're going to ask for those completed on-site monitoring forms, and then we'll make sure that you have any documentation of corrective action that you might have found, or if you had to follow up because of something that you saw at one of your sites, that you have that documented as well. So again, I probably can't say this enough. Do your monitoring now. If you have many sites, you probably have a schedule that you and your staff will follow, just to make sure that all of your sites get visited for breakfast and lunch. And it's great if you can show that to your SRS that you have a plan in place, but even better if you can show them the completed on-site monitoring forms. So get it done, get that part out of the way, and then also you'll have a better idea of what things need to be fixed in your program operations, if anything. That way you can be better in tune with what's going on there. Um, Making sure also that once you've completed the forms that you check that they are complete, that you have completed all of the fields on there, you've answered all of the questions, that all of the documentation is there to support it, and that all of the signatures are in place, that the site manager, the kitchen manager for that kitchen or for that site that you reviewed signed the form, and that your whoever's acting as the monitor signed it as well. Local school wellness policy. Um, So we want to make sure that you have a policy in place to promote school wellness and that it's meaningful and that it's being implemented. So that also ties into ongoing evaluation. Is it supporting current practices that are happening at your local level, at your schools? Is the public made aware of the policy and of the implementation of it? So to review these areas, we will ask for your current local school wellness policy, and then we'll ask where it's been made available to the public. Most frequently, it's posted on the school district website, so we'll go looking there to see that we can find it. And then we'll want to see documentation of any reviews that you've done or assessments or any updates that you've made to your local school wellness policy. Do you have a wellness committee that meets regularly to assess and review your policy? We'll want to see meeting minutes if you do that. And then if you've used a wellness policy assessment tool, we'll want to see the results of that too. So to prepare, check your website to make sure that you can find your wellness policy there and that it's the most current version. If it's not, get in touch with whoever's managing your school website and give them the updated one. And then assess your policy. Some of those tools are pretty easy to access, and they don't take that much time once you sit down and think about it, but just make sure that you have the appropriate people on hand to answer those questions. So that might be specific people at each different school, like the principal, the school nurse or the physical education teachers involved so that they can actually assess your policy with you and make sure that it's actually meaningful, that it's something that is actually relevant to your schools. Smart snacks, we'll need to make sure that your schools are compliant with the smart snacks requirements. So that applies to any food and beverages sold outside of the child nutrition programs. Do they meet the smart snacks requirements? And then also that you are following requirements for exempt fundraisers. Do you have a way to track those? The documents that we'll ask to see would be labels for the smart snack items. And then we would like to see any calculator results pages. If you don't put your food into the calculator, we will, and we'll use what our results indicate. But hopefully you've gone through and anything that you're selling, you've determined that it's compliant. So all that you have to do is show us the results page showing us that it is. And then for the fundraisers, working with your school officials, making sure that you've got a way to track any of those exempt food fundraisers, making sure that you're following whatever requirements are in place there too. So to prepare, if anybody else in your schools other than you, other than food service, is selling food or beverages during the school day, make sure you contact them. It might be through a school store, um, or a snack shack or something like that, and make sure that they are aware that your compliance is tied to them following these rules, making sure that they know that they're supposed to be serving food and beverages that meet certain requirements. Making sure that they can check program or check product compliance. Hopefully they're doing it on their own, but it's probably a great practice just to go in and make sure that they are serving things that aren't going to get you into trouble. Professional standards, making sure that you are providing required training and continuing education for all of your staff, for all of your food service employees. Making sure that you're keeping track of that for them and that they're meeting the requirements depending on what type of employee they are. And that if you have a food service director that was hired after July 1st, 2015, that they met the hiring standards for that position, depending on the size of your operation. So to review those things, we will ask for a roster of all food service employees and then a completed professional standards tracker or other documentation to support that each and every employee has completed the minimum training hours that are applicable to their jobs for the current year. And given that we might be doing your review earlier in the year, we might ask to see that everybody completed their hours for last year, or we might ask to see what your training plan is for the rest of this year. Um, Again, it's one of those things where it's great if you can just show your reviewer what your plan is and how it will keep everybody in compliance. And that way we can be assured that you're going to be following these program regulations. The training documents to support the hours. So if they have training certificates, if they have program agendas or brochures showing the hours that they completed, things like that for all of your staff. We'll ask to see those. And then if you had a food service director hired after July 1st, 2015, we'll ask for documents that support them being put in that position, that they met the hiring requirements and that they completed the required food safety training. So to prepare, make a plan for how your employees are going to meet their training requirement for this year, and start organizing things. If you're a smaller SFA, it's probably easiest just to keep a binder or a folder for each employee, um, kind of showing whether they're full-time or part-time, or if they're a manager. That way you know the hourly requirement that they have to meet, and then just in their folder or behind a tab, putting copies of their training certificates. That way you have the documentation right there to show that they met the requirement. For food safety, this is one of those areas that we try to review what we can offsite, but then some of it just has to be reviewed on-site during the observation piece. We'll ask for a copy of your food safety or HACCP plan and make sure that it follows HACCP hazard analysis critical control point criteria. We'll ask for health inspections, making sure that the local health department is visiting your sites. And then we'll need to look at food storage to make sure that food is being stored properly and at safe temperatures. Health inspection reports, and we usually start by asking for reports for selected sites for the last 2 years, just to make sure that the health department is coming out twice a year, or at least if they're not coming out that frequently, that you're conducting outreach to them and asking for those visits. So just make sure you're documenting any phone calls or emails that you've made to ask them to come out. We'll ask to see your food safety plan, as I mentioned, and then we'll ask for temperature logs for those food storage areas to show that you are maintaining proper temperatures for those food areas. So to prepare, you can take a look at your food safety or HACCP plan and make sure that it's been recently updated. I know with a lot of kitchens, some of the setups have changed since COVID. So just making sure that your food safety plan is actually relevant to your school kitchens, and that it doesn't need to be updated. Maybe call the health department and let them know, or remind them of the requirement that you need visits. You need 2 visits every year, and ask them if they can come out. If they're overworked or if they have too much on their plates, which might be the case, just make sure you document that that phone call so that there's a record of it. And then make sure that you have your most current health inspection reports posted at your points of service. Again, it's one of those things where if you have it posted in the kitchen or in your kitchen office, great. But it needs to be in view of participants. So just make sure you have a copy also posted where the kids coming through the service line can see the results of your most recent health inspection. Buy American. So using domestic agricultural products, we need to make sure that you're using those whenever possible and documenting a reason when you can't. So we're going to be asking for any type of exception documentation that you might have, any type of documented reason for why you might have picked broccoli from Mexico or somewhere else, or something like that. We just need to see that you have an approved or an appropriate documentation, exception documentation kept. So what you can do to prepare is, again, you can put on your monitoring hat and go into your walk-ins or your freezers and check the produce packaging or the product packaging and make sure that it's products that were grown in the USA. And if it wasn't, work with your suppliers. At this point, most of them should be aware of the requirements that they need to be procuring food for you from domestic sources, but making sure that they're aware um, so that way you can be compliant with this requirement. When we come out, we are going to have our reviewer take a look in your walk-ins as well. So just making sure that everything is procured domestically. Program outreach. So you are required to conduct outreach for the school breakfast program if you operate it. There's an asterisk there. If you don't operate the school breakfast program, this is not applicable to you, but you need to be letting your families know that it's available to them. So we'll ask to see the reminder materials that you've sent out during the school year. And then whether or not you operate a summer feeding program, we need to, or you need to be providing outreach on the summer food service program and letting families know where they can find meals during the summer. So we'll ask to see the outreach materials. At this point, we'll probably ask to see what you did last school year, or if you're already thinking ahead to the end of this school year, you can show us what you're planning to do for that. So to prepare, it's pretty simple. All you need to do is just set those outreach materials aside for the reviewer to look at. Okay, after school snack program. If you do not operate the after school snack program, then this part of the review won't apply to you. But if you do, at one of the sites that we're reviewing, we will start first with a documentation review. So we need to make sure that you are serving snacks that meet the meal pattern requirement for the snack program, that you are serving the snacks after the end of the school day and also providing educational and enrichment activities, and that you're maintaining an adequate counting and claiming system. Are you maintaining accurate snack counts? So we'll ask first for snack production records for a designated time period and the meal counts for that time frame so that we can make sure that you're meeting the snack meal pattern requirements and that we can validate a snack claim. And then we'll also ask to see a snack monitoring form. It is a program requirement that you maintain oversight and review your snack program within the first 4 weeks of operation. So we're right in that window now. So that's again, the best thing that you can do right now is conduct a monitoring review for your snack programs. Not only will it be within the required time frame, but it's also great preparation just to make sure that the people serving snack, which might not be you, are following any rules or regulations that are in place, and that they're serving snack correctly. Depending on the documentation review, we may or may not observe snack service. It is, again, one of those areas where if everything looks good on paper, we might not have to stay and look at it. But if we have additional questions that it can only be answered via observation, we might stick around and observe an after-school snack service. Special milk program. Again, if you don't operate this program, it won't be a part of your review. But we need to make sure that you're following whatever applicable pricing policy applies to your program and that you're charging for milk appropriately, that your counting and claiming is appropriate, that you're adequately and accurately counting the milk that's being served, and that you're serving milk to eligible participants, that these kids that are receiving the milk as part of this program are not also receiving meals under the National School Lunch Program or School Breakfast Program. So to review it, we will start by asking you for daily milk counts and milk order documentation for a specified time frame to make sure that we can see an adequate counting and claiming system in place. We might ask for your pricing policy or participant eligibility documents. And then if all of that looks good, we may or may not have to observe a service. Again, it's one of those areas where if it looks all right, we can typically stop there, but if there are questions that can only be answered via us observing service, we might do that too. So to prepare, just go ahead and get your records organized already. Even though you might not know the time frame, you can certainly start just maintaining some organization by keeping your accounts organized and maybe attaching your milk invoices so that way everything is already just prepared. And then go out and observe a service in a classroom or wherever it's being served just to make sure that it's being done properly. There isn't a prescribed review form for this, so it would just be you deciding what you need to be looking at, but a point of service is a point of service. So making sure that when you're out there, that whoever is serving the milk to the kids, that they're counting the milks as they're being served. All right, and then the fresh fruit and vegetable program. Once again, if you're not operating this program, it won't be a part of the review. But what we will be doing is first validating a claim. So making sure that all costs um, associated with a specified time frame are allowable and supported, that service is occurring per requirements, that it's not part of the school lunch or school breakfast service, um, and that all items served are allowable under the fresh fruit and vegetable program. We will ask for invoices for produce and other supplies, and then any other service documentation you have on file. And then unlike the other programs that I just mentioned, we will have to observe a service regardless of how stellar your documentation is. So please keep stellar documentation, but know that we are still just going to have to observe service to see how the program operates. And typically this is usually a fun observation for us because it is such a neat program, and it's so fun to see the kids get to experience produce that they might not otherwise be exposed to. So it's usually a part of the review process that we enjoy is being able to see the kids participate in this program. So once again, to prepare, just get your documentation organized and set aside, and then go out and observe a service yourself if you haven't done that lately. It's a great way to have some joy in some of the, daily grind that we tend to have. All right, so we've covered, I think, pretty much all areas of the review. And again, we've covered just an overview. We didn't go question by question because you all operate unique programs, and we didn't want to have too much of this won't apply to you or this might apply to you. We are going to get into the more nitty-gritty going forward. So the communication that we've set up, your senior review specialist, your SRS that is going to be assigned to your review will be your main point of contact between you and the CNR review team. We've found through feedback over the years that, we all know that this is an overwhelming process. Nobody likes it. But it can be made even more overwhelming when you have dozens of people reaching out to you and asking for documentation. So we've determined that we're going to have this one point of contact between you and the rest of us here at CNR, and you'll receive any requests for information directly from them. So they're going to be providing you with your specified list of documentation that you need to submit for each review area, as well as the deadlines or the due dates that we need those documents from. And they'll go through area by area and ask any questions that pop up depending on how the review goes. So there will be phone calls. There are 3 planned phone calls between you and your SRS. There's the introduction call, which will be happening next over the next couple of weeks. That's when we'll have established your on-site review date, and you'll be getting your specific resource guide with everything that is needed for your program by what dates, as well as other resources tied to that. So that will be the main introduction to your review buddy, your SRS, through the whole process. And then, as Catherine mentioned, you'll have the financial review call. Your SRS will be there, but they'll also have a financial review specialist on the line so that we can get some of those preliminary financial review questions answered and out of the way to further determine how far we need to look into your financial processes. And then you'll have the on-site preparation call, and that's where your SRS will introduce you to the person who will be coming on site and observing service. So again, they won't be a complete stranger. They'll be apprised of how the review process is going, because you and the SRS will have completed will have painted such a complete picture of how your program is operating that they're going to know exactly what they're walking into. You're going to know exactly who they are, and all that they need to do is just observe your fantastic meal service. So those are the three planned calls. You can, of course, call your SRS at any time throughout the review process. You can have their number on speed dial. That's our intention, is that they're going to be there with you to support you and help you get through it. They'll also be sending you emails summarizing any of the phone calls that you guys have. And that's how they'll request additional information if it's needed. So just make sure that their email address is coming through your system. If you haven't heard from them in a while, maybe check your spam folder and see if their emails are going there. Sometimes that happens, or feel free to just give them a call and say, hey, you know what? I haven't heard from you in a while. I haven't received an email. That way you guys can make sure that you're staying connected. And then, of course, if any questions on your end pop up, feel free to call or email anytime, whether it's about the review or the process. Again, we want you to feel supported for all of the hard work that you're doing. Okay, so thank you all for listening with great patience as we've been going through all of this. A link to this recorded training will be provided to you with your AR notification letter that you'll be getting in the next couple of weeks so that you can re-review it and share it, whatever you need to do, as well as a Q&A. Oops, I did not mean to stop sharing. Let's see if I can go back there. You'll get a copy of any questions. There we go. And we didn't have any questions come through the chat. But if you do have any questions that come up before you, okay, we do have a question now. Several SFAs were notified of an AR, but we have not heard from Stan. Yep. So we will be reaching out to you over the next week or two of when what your next steps are. So we'll be reaching out to confirm. Great. Some of you have already received those. Great. So it is a process. We are going to be reaching out to everybody to schedule and further provide details. So the recording will include the slides and audio. It will be video and audio. And again, we didn't want to include anything that was too specific in this presentation because you're going to be getting your specific checklist. We're calling it the resource guide with everything that you'll be needing to submit, as well as the due dates. So if anybody has any other questions that pop up between now and your next mode of communication, if you don't have an SRS yet, feel free to respond to that letter that you received from Kendra, myself, and Catherine. You can respond there. Okay. Our state agency said all of the offsite documents were due by September 15th. We'll go ahead and firm that up with you. Yeah, our intention was to kind of break everything apart so that it was a little bit more manageable. We'll figure out what that discrepancy is there. But yeah, you can expect to be hearing from us in the next couple of weeks with additional steps. Okay. Thank you everybody for being here. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I hope that you have a wonderful review process. I know it's, again, not everybody's favorite thing, but it's a really great time to highlight all the good things that you guys are doing. And that's certainly our hope and our focus. We obviously all care about you guys and the programs, and we want to highlight the good and just focus on things that need improvement in a more positive way. So have a great day, everybody. Thank you.